This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information. Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. Now, since Donald Trump's inauguration, we have seen widespread retrenching on companies' DEI goals and strategies. Companies that seem to be the absolute standard bearers and trailblazers of forward thinking when it comes to building inclusive and representative workforces. I'm thinking Meta, Accenture, Amazon. They're all cutting their DEI programs faster than you can say rainbow washing. So what does this mean for us? Why has it happened? And what do we expect the next 4 years to bring to the DEI story? These are all the questions that we're going to explore today with our amazing guest, Rocki Howard. Now, Rocki is the founder and chief diversiologist officer at Diversiology, which is a digital program management system that helps DEI practitioners to do more with an ever more constrained budget and limited focus. Prior to that, Rocki has held several senior leadership roles at the Mum Project, Smart Recruiters, where she was Chief Diversity Officer, and Resource Solutions. Rocki is also the host of 2 podcasts, the Voices of Diversity and Grown Woman Life. By the way, Rocki, I hate having other podcasters on the podcast because I always feel like I'm going to get shown up, but I've decided to have you on anyway because I know we're in safe hands for this really important topic. Rocki, welcome to the show.
Oh, Felix, thank you for having me. And let me tell you, the magic of both of those is that we don't overproduce it. We're not trying to be network news. We're just trying to be authentic. So let's just have a great conversation. Those are the best podcasts, right?
I totally agree with you. And I mean, what interesting times to be having this conversation. I mean, interesting is one word for it, but interesting times to be having this conversation. I wonder if you could just start with a little bit of an answer to, like, what the hell's going on at the moment?
I wish I could answer that, but you know what? I'm going to give you a long answer. Because I'd like to go back to 2020, right? When we saw the certain boom of diversity. And it's really funny because I remember being in conversations in 2020 and saying, this isn't going to last, right? Is this a moment? Is this a movement? Or are we really making sustainable momentum? And my fear at that time was that we had this interesting, almost pop culture culmination, right? In the fact that we were in the middle of a global pandemic, which none of us were prepared for. And I think rightfully so, a lot of people wanted to do something positive. They wanted to do something, right? We're trapped in our homes. We didn't know what to do. We felt helpless. And then the murder of George Floyd came about. And it was horrible. But if you lived in a Black community, to be honest, I could add 100 other names to that, right? And so the thing was, though, is that you had this culmination of both. And so then people started taking all of this action, right? And I think it was because of the moment in time in history. The challenge really was, in my opinion, even back then, is that people were making decisions that felt good, right? And so it was, I'm going to, pledge $1 million to the NAACP, which I'm not saying is wrong. That was great, except for there was no strategy behind it. We really didn't take the time to understand some very key and critical things. One, what does DEI look like in our organizations? What does it mean? I believe for DEI to be successful, and of course we've weaponized the word, so whatever you want to call it today, I'm going to call it DEI for clear understanding of what we're talking about. right? But I've always believed that it needed to be a business imperative and a human imperative. And unless they were tied to our business strategy and our human strategy, then it wasn't going to work. And we were hiring people for chief diversity officer roles, for diversity officer roles, for whatever. I got to benefit from that, quite honestly. However, we were hiring people who, if you could spell DEI, you were qualified. We were voluntolding people into those roles. And so we didn't really understand what it would take to build sustainable initiatives within our organizations. There was no strategy. There wasn't an understanding of change management. There wasn't an understanding of talent management and how inclusion impacted this. There wasn't metrics that we could tie for success. We didn't even have a common definition of what we were all working towards. And so I think it's really important for us to start there in terms of setting the stage. People had a lot of really good intentions. There were some companies who felt like they didn't have a choice and it was performative. I believe that people had good intentions, but they didn't quite know how to get to the impact. And so now we're investing millions of dollars, and then let's move forward. We come out of the pandemic and we go into what I'm going to call a global recession. I don't know why we're not calling it a recession. We don't want to say that word out loud. But when you look at the economy over the last, 18 months, we've all really struggled. If you look at the unemployment rates, while they're staying neutral, in a lot of cases is because people are underemployed. The advent of AI, how that's shifting roles and jobs and technology and the DEI narrative. Then you look at revenue going down for companies. I hard pressed to think of any company I know of that hasn't done layoffs in the last 18 months, staff reductions, have reduced hiring, etc. And so now when you get there, you have to look at your business imperatives and human imperatives. And the challenge is we didn't tie these two together. And there were also several things that we didn't do right. Again, great intentions, not good impact. And so now we're here. And I think there's a couple of things. I'm sure we're going to get to talk about President Trump, the new executive orders, etc., which is also creating fear. But if you think about this, and companies can try to make decisions, but if you think about this, this kind of erosion of DEI, the weaponization of the word, etc., this started before Trump went into office. And so the thing that I want us to be really careful about, though, to be honest, is yes, there are companies who have certainly backed down off of their DEI initiatives. I question whether those were performative issues. Did they have the strategy? Did they know why they were doing it in the first place? Were they just being PC and now they felt like they had permission not to be? That's one thing. The other thing that I want us to consider is we're hearing about all of the companies who are backing down. We're not hearing a lot about the companies who are doubling down, because those companies are not necessarily announcing it, right? They're going to continue to do the work. And so I want to make sure we're not applying an 80% rule to 20% of what's happening. And I also believe it's a much more sensational narrative to go, oh, here's another company cutting out DEI, and than it is to say, well, here's 8 companies who are keeping it. And the other thing we should consider, and then I will be quiet for a second, is have we reduced staff in DEI areas in proportion to how we've reduced staff in other areas of the business? And now the narrative is being extracted to serve a purpose versus, hey, like this company has reduced all staff, and so now we're doing that work in a different way. So it's a really long answer to your question, Felix, but I think it's important to set the stage.
No, I think it's really useful, Rocki. Obviously a lot to unpack. I think there was, in particular, one theme that I'd just like to go into a little bit more detail, which is, I think it feels, I'm going to put words in your mouth a little bit, but that there's a sort of an unrecognized truth that companies have to act differently in times of scarcity than in times of plenty. And as you were talking, I was sort of thinking about maybe the staff that are specifically dedicated and looking at DEI within an organization. I'd imagine that you might be able to find some parallels between staff in other departments that maybe only wore one hat previously, who, because they're operating in a scarcer environment, their roles as they were have become redundant, and they've had to spread themselves more thinly across more areas, as you say, as companies have made redundancy. So that's an interesting challenge as to whether actually those diversity officers or people who diversity leads, maybe they still sit within an organization, or maybe their work's been picked up. So maybe that just sort of sensationalization of it by media outlets may not be telling the full story.
Right. It may not be telling the whole story. And here's the thing, right? So, first of all, I want to be really clear, because this is why we founded Diversiology. Even in the boom, diversity practitioners were not given the resources that they needed, right? They weren't given the people, the budget, the time. In many cases, they didn't have the expertise to make real impact. And so, even pre budget reductions and revenue reductions, we saw that to be a challenge. So diversity practitioners were behind the line, so to speak, right from the very beginning. Now budgets start to shift and change. And even those of us who are really good and really dedicated to the work may not have been having the impact we wanted to have, because we didn't have the resources to do it in the first place. And so now when you're looking, and we weren't empowered to embed diversity into the business strategy. And this is mistake number one. So when businesses make decisions about resources, they look at their business strategy. And if DEI wasn't clear from a business strategy perspective and a human strategy perspective, not a human events perspective, but a human strategy perspective now, and you couldn't find the data to then say this is how it's impacting, then it becomes a challenge, right? And so I think this is part of it. I think several companies are dealing with that very reality and finding a different way to try to get the work done. Does it suck? Absolutely it does. Is it fair? Probably not. But my message to everyone is, don't assume that because we're hearing this company has less diversity resources means that they aren't committed to doing the work. It may be that they have less overall business resources, and no different than marketing, sales, product, etc. They have to find a way to optimize the resources they have to still get the work done.
So let's talk about the work, because I think this is obviously where you're a specialist. Um, how can businesses better link their DEI goals and strategy to the broader business goals and strategy?
Well, I think first of all, again, you go back to the frenetic energy of 2020, and we're just writing checks and hiring people, etc. And I can tell you, I've walked into some of those situations where they're like, well, we don't know what we want you to do, just go do it. Or we want you to talk to clients and make them feel really good that we're doing some good DEI stuff. That's not it, right? You have to be able to look at your business and go, what is it that we do for a living? What makes us really successful, right? Um, Maybe I am in retail, and for me to be successful in retail, I have to have a clear and core understanding of all of the demographics for which I serve. And then how do I attract those demographics, and how do I expand those selling whatever I sell into those market demographics? And so, you know what? Nike is someone who's done it really, really well in terms of market demographics, right? Nike understood, like, Nike was the first one to do, hey, we're going to do a Michael Jordan shoe. It was the first time you had seen a black man really amplified in a brand, and they saw success from that. Nike is very clear about amplifying women's voices, right? We had a commercial, they had a commercial last night during the Super Bowl that was amazing about women can't, yes, we can, right? You can just do it. And so it's a really good connection back to a company who understood how a commitment to DEI then helps generate revenue, expands their overall business goals. And so when you make that connection, then you can strategically start to work through, well, what does DEI mean in our organization? Right. And I think it's really important to start with that business strategy, because when we can connect things back to business, when we can connect things back to revenue, when we can connect things back to the core things that our business is doing and how it has business impact, we then protect those things, right? Like, you protect your salespeople no matter what, because they drive revenue. And, you know, the heads of sales probably have more power than most functional executives in an organization because they make the money, right? And so one of the things that we weren't really always able to do as diversity practitioners is to really understand how our work impacted the business strategy. Now, I have a friend that talks about this all the time. Sometimes we go in and we go, all right, what is the business strategy? And no one can tell us. And so if you don't have an overall business strategy, you might want to start there.
Yeah, well, let's assume. I think hopefully we can assume that most organizations do. I mean, who knows? Um, but I wonder if you could share. So I think Nike's a really great example, and yeah, they sort of, as you say, in a lot of ways, been leaders for this. It feels like it's an easier link for a consumer business to be able to link it through to business outcomes. I wonder if you've seen some really good work going on from, more B2B. I don't know. Don't want to say it, but maybe more boring businesses. Like,
Well, think about it this way, right? And look, you all, I always avoid the question of who does this really well and really right. I'm sure people will go, but Nike does this, that, and the other, right? So we're talking about very specific things. I think when you think about tech companies and product companies, for example, right? If I have a particular product and I am building something, then I need to be able to have the diverse perspectives of anyone who might use the product. If I'm in a service business and I'm providing services to people, who do I serve? How can I serve more people? What is the perspective on how we're providing this service, and what could be an offshoot of the service that it might do? We're in the boom of AI, and so I want to build an AI product. How do I make sure that this product isn't offensive and doesn't create bias to certain parts of my audience, and so that everyone has trust in the particular product? I mean, you can look at this multiple ways, but you have to be willing to do the work. I work with an insurance client, and they serve a particular demographic of people. And so how do you understand that demographic if from a diverse perspective, right? And so it applies to just about any business, but you have to understand it, and you have to understand what your goals are around it. And so, like, at Diversiology, we've put together acronym. It's called reflect. And, one of the R stands for review, where you really have to reflect and review. What is your purpose for wanting to embed diversity into your organization? How does it affect your business? How does it affect your key stakeholders? How does it affect your clients? How does it affect your employees? Those are all business imperatives that we need to consider, no matter what words you're using.
Yeah, that makes just taking it back to first principles, building up in commercial principles. That makes total sense, Rocki. So you mentioned the executive orders recently, and I mentioned some of those organizations that have been backpedaling on their DEI goals. I was gutted to see Accenture do it over this last weekend. I've always liked the cut of their jib, but not anymore. I think the question I would have there is, do you think it feels to me and that in America there's been a visceral reaction against the DEI agenda, the DEI progress, coming out of Donald Trump's administration, coming out of a lot of I guess thought leaders. I mean, you got Andrew Tate, our worst export ever. But I wonder if you could just share from your perspective, why do you think it's such? What happened? Why is there such a visceral, aggressive, fearful response to something that to someone like me feels such a logical, such a logical thing to do, to build a business that's inclusive and that doesn't unfairly discriminate?
Yeah. I've been asking myself this question a lot. With all of the problems that we have in the world, why is DEI at the top of the current administration's priority list? I don't know that answer. It does feel to me that this is a lot about power and privilege, right? And I think the diversity, the very spirit of diversity has been to create more inclusive places. And I do think that to do that, it means we have to make space. And people feel like to make that space, I have to give up some of my power and privilege, right? I also think, quite frankly, we excluded white men from the conversation, and white men are pissed off about it, quite frankly, I believe. And this is a response to that. And I don't categorize all or nothing of anything, you all. So just to be really clear,
There's safe space, Rocki. We know that everything we're saying was with the best intentions behind them.
right, with the best of intentions. I don't want like white men blowing me up on LinkedIn going, I don't do that. I know that. I know that nothing is a all or anything circumstance. But what this feels like is a group of people clearly trying to reclaim power and privilege and make it clear. Here's the other thing that if you look at history, we know that happens with any kind of significant humanity movement. You make progress and then the world comes down and slams you back. So you can see this during the civil rights movement. You can see this through, gender equity initiatives, etc. You make progress and then someone comes and pushes you back. So to a certain extent, I look at this as oh, wow, well, we've made enough progress that this feels threatening to people who then want to make us roll back. I also have to believe, you and I were talking, Felix, before we came live, about the power of negative and positive thought. I also have to believe that there are more people in the world who just believe in humanity, and more people in the world who believe in treating people with dignity and respect than there are people who aren't. But again, we're sensationalizing this story. And unfortunately, when we talk about Trump's executive orders, they have incited fear. And so now we're all trying to figure out, what do we do? I mean, in America, we have things happening like not only the president, um, creating executive orders against DEI. Now, look, let's be really clear: executive orders are not law, so we need to understand that. And a lot of what President Trump has done in his first, my God, we're not even in the first 30 days, are being challenged legally in courts. And so we don't know that this is going to stay. However, when you reverse things like affirmative action, when you say, I'm going to create watch lists for people, there are literally diversity practitioners being put on lists right now. There are companies who are saying, the new executives orders are making it, we're ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity. And we're changing how federal contractors, what they can do and what they can't do. And so in America, quite a few, including I'm sure Accenture, companies make millions, including billions of dollars as federal contractors. So there's a balance that people are trying to fight to be able to continue their businesses and to continue to provide jobs to people. And at the same time, not sure how they do that and align with their company values. And so this is a really complex time.
I get that. But also, principles aren't principles when they're free and easy. So I've got limited.
Well, and here's the thing: principles are principles with that. And there are things you can do to just stand. There are companies who are saying, we are not going to change. We are not going to stop doing the work that we're doing.
I think Apple did just that, didn't they?
For sure, Apple did it, Costco did it, where they just stood up and said, no, we're not going to do it. Come get us. And I will tell you, on any given day, about 80% of my client base is saying, we're going to continue to do the work. Now, they're not going to say that publicly because they're afraid of the ramifications, but they are still doing the work. And they're looking for ways to adjust so that they're not on a radar or on, some social media list that says they're doing things wrong, but they are committed to doing the work. And so I think as HR practitioners, we really need to think about what this work is about. This work is about something that is completely legal. This work is about making space for all people to come into our organization. It's about broadening our pipelines of qualified talent. Why it is we think diverse hire is oxymoronic with qualified hire, I'm not quite sure why that is. I could go on a whole rant about that. But our goal is to broaden the talent pool, to hire, to attract the most diverse candidate pool that we can for the roles that we have, to hire the highest qualified person, and then to make sure that we create cultures where that person can have business impact because they feel like they're included in our organizations. Why is this a bad thing? And if we stick to those things, it's not about quotas. It's not about excluding anyone, including white men. It is about making sure that we are inclusive through the talent management life cycle. And none of those things are illegal.
Absolutely right. And all of those things just improve business outcomes.
Absolutely.
And I'll add to your anecdotal experience, Rocki, in terms of your client base. At Instant Impact, none of our clients are rolling back anything they were doing with DEI goals and strategies because they really believe it, and we help them do exactly what you were saying just then on the hiring side of things, and it's always been there's never been any question about whether we put it in. They're the kind of organizations that see it as they see it as a business imperative,
a business imperative and a human imperative.
And I think that what your business and my business share is a real focus on the sort of small and medium sized organizations. And I wonder if you think that those organizations might be missing from the narrative at the moment.
Well, I absolutely believe they're missing from the narrative. And I believe that that's purposeful because we've terrified them, right? And they don't want to be the companies that come out and stand and then feel like they have an adverse impact on what's going on. But I've always been a big believer that small to mid-sized businesses set the stage for how larger businesses will eventually follow, right? And so I do believe that they're missing from the narrative. And we have to remember that just because people aren't talking doesn't mean that they don't have a story to tell. And just because they aren't talking doesn't mean they're not getting the work done. And so, to your point, it goes back to my point about sensationalism. It is much sexier for the press to go, Accenture is cutting their DEI initiatives, than to say, but this group of 100 small to mid-sized companies, which when you look at their economic impact meet or exceed Accenture's, are not doing that.
Yeah, it's that's bang on, and it's so interesting because, well, you'll know I'm a big techie. And I think with this whole advent of AI, I've been doing a lot of reading into adoption, and it feels a lot like the journey that a new technology goes on. And Gartner have um, this really great concept, which is called the Gartner hype cycle, and it's talking about the the perceived impact of a new technology. And it starts off when not many people know about it. It starts off pretty low, and then when people hear about something that they're excited about, they want to see change, it goes up really high to a peak, sort of almost an artificial peak. Then it dips down low when people realize, oh, when companies start adopting this technology, and then they think, oh, it's nowhere near as good as I thought it was. Um, it's not happening in the way that we thought it was. The salespeople lied to us. And then it goes into what's called the trough of disillusionment, which is where people have basically written it off. And then over time, it creeps up and up and up and up, often to a plateau that's above the peak that people expected it to have at the beginning. And that happens quietly, and it happens almost behind the scenes, and it happens through doing good work and adoption and all of the sort of elements that we were talking about before. It almost feels like that's been the story over the previous years. So started off with DEI being something that a few businesses were doing really well. Then 2020 happened, a lot of frenetic activity, but people not tying it to the business objectives, people not seeing the benefits of it, dipping down to where we are now, which is a trough of disillusionment, where we still got people like you, like me, like our clients who believe in it. But then companies who are saying, hasn't worked for us. It's, we got missold it. And then hopefully we're going to see over the next 5-10 years a sort of creeping up back to where we think it could get to. That's the optimist's view on it anyway.
Yeah, and I think in that story too, people, like when it goes into that trough you're talking about, you have to not take the short term view. You have to take the long term view, right? And when you take the long term view, you reap the benefits of doing that, right? If you are clear, and this is why it goes back to really understanding why this is important, what it is. I think a lot of people have reduced DEI to, a few very specific demographics, and they've reduced it to a very few specific actions like quotas versus a bigger picture of what it looks like and how it impacts your business long term. And so, we've got to go back and educate. We've got to go back and correct the things that we didn't do right. Right? If we can't tell the story as practitioners for you in terms of the business impact and the human impact, then that makes it hard for us. So there are things we've got to go back and we've got to correct to get this right. And so there is going to be a shift, I believe, in how we do the work. I am quite frankly heartbroken that we've weaponized the word DEI. And I would love to spend time, getting it back and arguing and debating over it. Unfortunately, what I believe, it's just much more important that we're doing the work.
No, I agree. Who do you think? I mean, how did do you have any idea of how that weaponization happened? Because it hasn't happened to the same extent here in the UK. Everything's everything that's a 10 out of 10 on your side of the Atlantic, so 6.5 to 7 out of 10 over here. I think that's the same with this. But I guess do you have any idea what happened there?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I would tell you though, here there has been a focus on it, and there have been certain individuals who have made companies' lives so miserable about it and called them out that people wanted to kind of shy down. They're like, look, we're just trying to do the right thing by people, and we're just trying to keep our businesses going. And so um, you know, Project 2025 in that document, there was work done behind the scenes for it. There was a strategy behind it that they executed quite well. And part of it was to weaponize this word and this work to their benefit. And I, I, I tend not to speak about things that I don't know deeply and well. So I'll kind of leave it there. But those are the things that I've observed. And so if you can weaponize the word, if you can make Americans feel like this is a bad thing and that they are actually being penalized by this DEI work, if you can make people feel uncomfortable, if you can imply that actually the very tenets of diversity, which are about representation for the multiple dimensions of diversity and treating all people well. But if you can make people fear that they're not included in the diversity narrative and so therefore they're excluded, then again, this creates sensationalism and fear, and then fear turns into a weapon.
That's so interesting. And again, I keep going back to tech implementation, which maybe is not particularly helpful, but there's this concept where, you're looking at how to get people to buy into a change program, like any change program, and including people in the design of a new way of working is so important, including users in the design of what your new product's going to be is absolutely critical. And it's so interesting that you said that some people, particularly white men, were left out of that design, that left out of the conversation. It just, yeah, it's yeah, I've never heard that perspective before, but it really resonates.
Well, and also think about it like part of a good diversity practitioner, like when you think about the skills that are needed, I think we also often think that that person can advocate for a dimension of diversity, right? But that's certainly not it. And so great diversity practitioners have project management, talent management, but they also have change management experience. And what we forget, if you look at it, is change management takes 3 to 5 years to actually get through the cycle. So we're in that cycle piece, and we didn't approach DEI as a change management solution. There are some people, the experts who have done it really, really well, and they are typically the people who have sustainable programs because they knew it would take time, and they've used all of those change management strategies to bring people along the journey. But most organizations didn't do that. And so it's interesting that you mentioned the change management piece, because I think a lot of us as practitioners underestimated the change management piece. And here's why. Because people just believe, oh my God, like here's the other mistake we made. We just believe that every human would think this is the right thing. So certainly there's no change management work that needs to be done because this is just the right thing to do. Um, Now we're seeing that not everybody believed that it was the right thing to do. And so you needed to bring them along the journey, and you needed to help them understand how they interacted and they were part of that.
Fantastic. Well, Rocky, I wonder if, just as a sort of way to bring us to a bit of a close here, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about diversiology and what it is that you guys are looking to achieve with the organization, because it's such an interesting story.
Well, I really appreciate that opportunity. I think when I was in chief diversity officer roles, chief people diversityology, chief people and equity officer roles, what I realized is even in those roles, I didn't have the things that I needed to do all of those things that we're talking about, right? I didn't have all of the expertise that I needed. I didn't have the time to do all of the research that I needed and stay on top of things. I didn't have the staff that I needed. I didn't have the budget that I needed. And so then you wind up doing the things that are quick wins, that are visible wins, that often come off as being performative because you don't have time to do the deep strategy work. And that's what I wanted to solve for, right? I also found that a lot of the approach was very academic and it wasn't practical or pragmatic. And I was finding that consulting companies were charging companies, especially small to medium, really large amounts of money, and the suggestions that they were giving them were not actually executable within the context of their business. And so what we set out to do at Diversiology is to help practitioners optimize their resources and maximize their impact through content, coaching, and community. So right now we have a community of about 450 practitioners. Come join us. It's free. And in that community, we give people access to curated news every day that we summarize. We give them access to Diversiology calendars, to our events that we do, to certain free resources. And then we move it even further and we provide a digital program management system for practitioners for our paid services. So you don't have time to figure out what to say to people, what's going on in the news. Imagine, something coming into your inbox once a week that says, here's what's going on. Here's what you need to do. Here's something you can do for your leaders. Here's something you can do for your people. Here's something that you can do for yourself. And you don't have to do all the work behind it. We have training hubs that we're building out, 15-minute or less lessons, because we also know that people are busy. We talked about resources being shrunk. So if you ask someone to show up to an hour-long training, they're not going to do it. They're not going to retain it. They're going to be multitasking. How do you do that? But if you say to someone, hey, watch this 15 minutes worth of training and do those micro learnings, they can do. And we're also doing quite a bit of support for ERGs. So lots of companies have started ERGs, but they don't have the resources to keep those ERGs going and invest in those ERGs so that we get the best out of it. So our model is really about affordable solutions that are based on content, community, and coaching.
That sounds fantastic. Rocki, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Felix, thank you so much. And can I give a shout to Danny, who introduced us, who I just love. Danny, if you're listening, I love you always. And I so appreciate you. And I so appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk to your audience.
Thank you.